I was about 18 or 19 years old. I was back in Mississippi, driving in the back of an old pickup truck, working on a ranch there, Dr. Gordon Hazard's ranch. And there was a guy there who um, was one of the wealthiest people in Europe, and his name was Mike. And he taught me various things, but what he taught me on this one day that I'm going to share with you has stuck with me and rings in my brain almost, daily, weekly, even now, years later. What he said was, the context was I was basically talking about some book I had read, and he was like, well, why do you like the book? And I'm like, well, I like it because, I don't know, the author has a PhD or something like that. And I'll never forget what he said. He turned to me and he said, but Tai, is he worth a damn? So pardon my French there. Is he worth a damn? That was a question that he had for me. And I could still remember it as if it was yesterday, going like, what's this guy talking about? What does he mean? It took me many years to kind of coalesce, for all the ideas to coalesce and for me to go, oh, I know what this guy's talking about. And I know now. I didn't know then. It was like he spoke to me in parables, And so I'm going to share with you what this means and why this is so relevant for you today. What he meant was summed up in this little book here as well. And this is why I call it the billionaire's brain. Because this guy right here, Charlie Munger, I talk about him a good bit. He's a billionaire. This guy that I was driving around the back of this pickup truck around this ranch, he wasn't quite a billionaire, but he was an investor that dealt with large sums of money, close to, I'm sure, $1 billion or more. So I was like, what is this guy, Mike, in Mississippi thinking? And then years later, I read this book, and there's a famous quote in there, or I'm trying to make it famous. You may have heard me talk about it a lot if you're on my Twitter or Instagram or on my Book of the Day newsletter. Charlie Munger said, to get what you want, you have to deserve what you want. The world is not yet a crazy enough place to reward a whole bunch of undeserving people. Well, what does that mean exactly? Well, what it means, is that most people in life are victims of their own making. You're going to learn this later in the 67 steps. They are focused on the lottery approach to life. Tomorrow's going to be better than today, just because I think it's going to be better than today. They're waiting, wishing upon a star. Whereas the billionaires, whether it be Mike, Charlie Munger, they're saying things like, but is that person worth a lot? He wasn't talking about money. When Charlie Munger says, to get what you want, you have to deserve what you want, he's not just talking about money. He's talking about anything. You want to make it in Hollywood. You want to make it as a professional athlete. You want to be a good parent, a good son, good daughter, a good spouse. You want to be in shape. You want to lose 100 pounds. You know what the formula for losing 100 pounds is? To lose 100 pounds, you have to deserve to lose 100 pounds. That means no shortcuts. Doesn't mean you can't be efficient, but no shortcuts. You want to make $1 million? Once you deserve $1 million and you give the world a little time to catch up, there'll be $1 million in your bank account. If you don't have the amount of money that you want, Charlie Munger would say, well, remember, my friend, the world's not yet a crazy enough place to reward a whole bunch of undeserving people. He came up with this concept or this discovery of what he coined learned helplessness. Now, as you go on your path towards success, this is going to be, if not the number one obstacle that you're going to run into internally, and of course externally, but it will be for sure one of these prominent issues you'll have to deal with. I own different companies, and with employees and staff, it's a recurring issue. And what it is best, I think, explained with this analogy. He did some research on dogs, okay? Took dogs, And I don't know, it was a side effect. They were doing an experiment on something else. I forget what it was. And they shocked the dogs, and the dogs could not get out. They were like in a box. Then they took, of course, those dogs eventually gave up. First, the dog tried to get out and jump out, but once it realized it couldn't get out, it just would lay down, these dogs. So then Martin Seligman took those same dogs who had been taught that they couldn't escape from their issues, their pain. He took them, he put them in a box that had just a low kind of floor, a low wall that clearly the dog could jump out of. He then shocked the same dog. By the way, he struggled with the ethics of shocking dogs. He talked to one of the top professors of ethics, and the professor said, "Do you think the greater good of mankind will be helped from shocking these dogs?" And so, if you're listening to this and you empathize with the dogs, he did struggle with that. But anyway, on to the main point. Put these dogs that had been taught to be helpless under pain, put them in this box, shock them. Now, those dogs, it was clear that the dogs could jump out of the box, okay? Could jump. But because they had been trained and reinforced previously that they couldn't escape from their pain, the dogs literally just sat down, laid down there, and whimpered. Now, he took some outside dogs, some normal dogs that had never been through that preconditioning before, stuck them in the box, shocked them, and of course the dogs leapt out, jumped right out and ran off. So Martin Seligman began to say, what's going on here? Are we literally saying that we can rewire the brain towards helplessness? And the answer, I think, over his research over time was yes. And what he found is that those dogs that had been trained to be helpless experienced much lower levels of happiness, whether it be, I don't know how he measured it, maybe it was dopamine or something, but they were literally depressed. Monkeys in a cage, I like to use that analogy in addition to the dogs. So you've been to the zoo, you see these monkeys, they're in a cage. Those monkeys would seemingly be happy, right? Every morning, lunch, nighttime, the monkey brings, the zookeeper brings a pail of food or whatever, berries or whatever he's feeding the monkey, and just throws it in there. Now, remember, the monkeys come originally, if they're wild monkeys, came from a jungle. In the jungle, you've got the chance that you could die of starvation. You have the chance that you could get eaten by a, panther or leopard or whatever. You have all these potential problems if you're a monkey and you live in the jungle. So you'd think it would all be solved by being inside this cage where everything's protected. But what they found, of course, is that these monkeys are not that happy. Monkeys in a cage experience much lower levels of happiness than monkeys that are out in the jungle. So once again, by teaching these monkeys to be helpless, to rely on the zookeeper, you think you would be doing good for the monkeys, but you're actually lowering the happiness. Now, I think you can see where I'm going here, but that's what I want to talk about. Martin Seligman, salary slave and learned helplessness. So you and I have been conditioned in many ways to feel helpless. Now, I mentioned salaries. We're going to talk about that. Let me step back even further. You and I grew up in an educational system, right, that you're in second grade, and they not only tell you the goal. Let's say you're in social studies and they go, all right, we're going to learn how to study the history of California. So they give you the goal. Now, instead of just giving you the goal and letting you be out in the jungle and say, here's a library, here's a whole bunch of books, go out and study whatever interests you in California history. No, we're not conditioned that way in modern education. The teachers come to us, if you went to public school or most private schools, and they say, all right, Tai, today we're going to read this chapter, then we're going to read that chapter, then we're going to read the next chapter. It's just like we're monkeys in a cage, and the zookeeper is bringing us, going, here you go. Here's today's pail of slop. And what happens, we're preconditioned to feel helpless when it comes to our education. That's why when I tell people that I read a book a day, they're like, wow, what do you do? And I'm thinking, this is what everybody should be doing. You should be continually in a process of self-education. Most people are conditioned what when it comes to income? They're salary slaves. Now, let me just put a caveat. I'm not necessarily saying that anybody who receives a fixed salary is a slave. Okay? It's not that cut and dry. There could be a circumstance where it makes sense, where it's not preconditioning. But I'm telling you, if you're not careful, the next thing you know, your understanding of finances, you sitting in a cage and a zookeeper bringing you a paycheck on the 1st and the 15th of the month. My goal for you in this program is to begin to rewire your brain to go, you know what? It doesn't have to be that way. Sure, there might be phases, there's ebbs and flows where you receive salary based on certain activities you're doing, but you don't have to completely fall into that trap of thinking that your income has to come from somebody besides yourself. That's why you see these big, the news, when there's layoffs, it's like people just fall apart. It's like, and I tell people, I'm like, in the modern world, look, we're in the modern world. There is no salary, there are no jobs anymore that you're vested in for the next 50 years on a guaranteed basis. That might have happened for a very short time in history. We tend to think our understanding of history is so short. We look back to the 50s and the 60s and we go, oh, those were the good old days when, you worked at a corporation and you stayed there forever. That was one teeny blip in the timeline of history. So today the topic is Stoic versus Epicurean, Arnold's 1,000 reps, Apache cold showers, and the Spartan whipping post. Why you have to develop thick skin. A lot of words there, a lot to cover. Those of you know one of my favorite book series is that I was given at 16 years old. You might have heard this in my TED Talk. Was from my grandfather Charles. And there was a saying that's always stuck with me. A nation is born stoic and dies Epicurean. A nation is born stoic. Well, what does that mean? Well, ancient philosophers were divided into different groups. One group was called the Stoics. Stoicism, you may have heard of this. Stoics basically believed that you must forego present pleasure in the hopes that you'd get something better. In a sense, they were the investors of ancient history, philosophically. And then you had the Epicureans, and Epicureans followed this Epictetus guy, or Epicurus, I think was his name. And he basically said that humans should live for now, that you should eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. You hear that even reflected in modern world. There's this, you hear it in, hip hop. It's called YOLO. You only live once, right? Now, the question is, which of those should you follow? And again, we've talked about the 500-year-old archaic mind. I cannot tell you what is right or wrong. This is not a black and white issue. Of course, there's some truth to both, right? Certainly there is something to, if you're only investing in the future and you're not living in the moment, you never know how long you're going to live, right? You must enjoy the moment. George Mumford taught Michael Jordan to live in the moment. But what I can tell you, if I can't tell you which one's right or wrong, I can tell you Newton's third law. For every action, there is an opposite and equal reaction. So what is the reaction that you'll get if you live a life that's Epicurean for the moment? My advice to you, it's probably not what you think. The Stoic life, the life filled with some toughness, some thick-skinned, is probably going to give you what you're looking for. So let me explain. Arnold's 1,000 reps, Apache cold showers, and the Spartan whipping post. Let's start. These are some examples. So Arnold Schwarzenegger came from a mentality as a bodybuilder, and I wrote an article about this. It's the Hillary Clinton article. I'll read this to you. It's I think you'll get some value. I just wrote that. You might have seen it on my site, and it has a quote from Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he talks about when he was young, bodybuilding. He had little calves. Bodybuilders obviously want to have big muscles everywhere, so he had these smaller calves. And he was like, I'm not getting what I wanted. I want big calves. So let me read to you what happened. I'm just going to read right from his words. He talks about, he heard of this idol, Reg Park. He said, when I first came to America in 1968, I didn't have big calves. In 1969, I visited Reg Park at his home in South Africa and stayed with him for a while. He would get up at 5 a.m. to train. So Reg, being my early idol, I also got up at 5 a.m. to train with him. The first thing he did every session was 10 sets of calf raises. His calves were a huge 20 inches. I looked at them and said, I want calves like that. So he put 500 pounds on the machine and started his first set. I screamed, 500 pounds, I'll rip my heel. He told me, when you walk with one foot in mid-stride, the other foot is supporting 250 pounds, so both feet can support a 500-pound workload. To really make the calves grow, you have to go up to 1,000-pound calf raises. No way, I said, but he listened to him. In 1 year, my calves grew 2 inches. They grew so quickly that some people began to say I had gotten calf implants. So what does that have to do with Stoics versus Epicurean? Well, most of us have grown up with a lot of technology. We've become slowly but surely weaker, softer, I should say, more sensitive, not willing to grit it out. The Stoics, though, believed in toughen up. I was wondering what would have happened to me if some fluent talker, some persuasive talker, had converted me to the theory of the 8-hour day and convinced me that it was not fair to my fellow workers to put forth my best efforts. I'm glad that the 8-hour day had not been invented when I was a young man. If my life had been made up of 8-hour days, I don't believe I could have accomplished a great deal. This country would not amount to as much as it has if the young men of 50 years ago had been afraid. And he's talking about working. So this is a guy lamenting the 8-hour day. 8 hour. How far the mighty have fallen, as the saying goes, right? Now I have people, I went and did a speech to this group of like a self-improvement company. I spoke. They brought me into Vegas a couple weeks ago. And they were at the end of my talk, because I talked about this, they were like, oh, Tai. The two owners were like, thank you. We said, why? They said, well, we have some employees that we really pay really well. They work 16 hours a week, and we pay them like full-time salary because they're good and we like them or whatever. And now they're starting to complain because they're hearing about this, oh, you know, if you do things right, you only have to work 4 hours a week. And they were complaining that they work 16 hours, 3 hours a day. And they were like, well, how come we don't only work 30 minutes a day? And I came in and gave this speech, and it's not just my speech, it's examples. Elon Musk, impact. He's like, forget 4-hour work. Edison's going, don't even put that in your brain. The whatever it is that makes that appealing to you and I, working less, you have to root out like a cancer, because that cancer will, what is the word? Metastasize, grow, and it will infect the rest of your life. I'm going to put this real simple for you right now. You are going to have to work and grind to get what you want. But there is a great solution. I learned this at the Amish. You can learn to love the grind. So that now, sometimes I've been able to manipulate my own mind, that cancer in my mind, so to speak, in my thoughts, to go, man, when I'm doing a grinding out job, whether it be accounting or taxes or whatever none of us like to do, I'm like, Tai, be excited, because one day you'll be 100 years old. Or maybe I won't live that long, but maybe you'll live to be 100. And you'll look back and you're like, man, I wish I had the energy to be able to even get up out of my bed and go into work and work 8 hours. Don't be caught in the moment. So many people are like, you got to learn to be in the moment. I'm like, no. In many ways, you have to learn to be out of the moment. And this is one of them. Learn to be thinking 50 years ahead and go, okay, well, someone was asking me. They just broke up with their girlfriend. And they were like, what do you do? And I'm like, the answer's right here. You will have to grind it out And there will be a day, and as painful as it seems now, if you can use your mind to project 50 years ahead, you'll be like, you know, it was the good old days? Those days when I was breaking up, dating different girls. Man, I was alive back then. That's how I knew I was alive. The second you stop working and grinding it out, you're not alive, my friend. I don't know what you are, but I could tell you this. I was in New Zealand, and I was on a farm, and I was working, and we were driving past this guy, and he said, "You see that guy mowing the grass?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know what's interesting about that guy? That guy won $20 million in the lottery 2 years ago." And I said, "Well, why is he mowing the grass?" I was like, "The guy got bored with life. He had no grind left. He didn't feel alive. He wanted to literally come mow the grass." So if you got everything you wanted right now, Alan Nation used to tell me, my mentor, "Tai, be careful of making $1 million before you're 30, man. You might not do what you think. It might trap you." So all of us have been tricked into, I don't know if it's because we saw some Princess Bride movie and we're like, "Ooh, wouldn't it be cool to be rich? Wouldn't it be cool to just get what we want?" No. Life is the grind. And once you love the grind, you love life. And once you hate the grind, you will hate life. For each of you that's watching this, that's an entrepreneur, and if you're in the 67 steps, I hope now the next step for you is to progress into the other programs that we have, the advanced 67 steps, which are more about living out your destiny, business, how to make money, financial independence. So the last 67 steps is titled Annihilating the Amygdala and MPFC Mastery. Okay? Good dopamine word. Everybody here is like, "Oh, I never heard of that." Annihilating the amygdala. Now, I just said that I waited to launch this step to show everybody who isn't launching their business, isn't making momentum, or not going to the next level because they're afraid that customers will write in and complain. Here's a little benchmark I use. If about 5% of people don't complain and write you nasty comments, you're a nobody. Your business is a nobody. You want some hate. Now, hopefully it's ungrounded hate. You don't want legitimate complaints. But there's a lot of weird people out there. I knew, you would think if you start a nightclub, what's the number one thing guys want from a nightclub? Men in this room? Would you like to go to a nightclub that has attractive women or not? Okay. So I made a nightclub, got in that business, and we figured out a way, connections, promotions, get a lot of beautiful women to go. So you'd think you'll never get a complaint, right? One day, checking my email, I get a complaint. "Tai, you built this business. I am very religious and conservative. Your clubs cause me to have a lot of lust." That's literally what it said. "I do not appreciate what you're doing." Now, one of my thoughts was, why are you going to a nightclub if you're very conservative, right? But the point is, fear, if you're not careful, and amygdala is the part of the brain that's an emotional center, and it controls the fear that's in your brain. If you don't control it, here's what will happen to you. And there was a story written a long time ago, an Aesop's fable. And so a dad and a son were going to town with a donkey to sell their farm goods. And the son was riding the donkey, and the father was walking along, and some people walked by, and they said under their breath, but the dad and son heard it, "What kind of a son disrespects his older dad and rides the donkey and doesn't let the dad ride the donkey?" So the son, amygdala is stirred up because social pressure triggers fear. Like if you're in 6th grade and all the kids laugh at you, it's because you hear the whispers of 10,000 generations from your great-great-grandparents saying, if you get ostracized, you might die. Because 50,000 years ago, if the tribe kicked you out, you were stuck out with the lions and tigers all on your own. So we've carried these fears in. So the son and dad, the son goes, "Ooh, I'm afraid. People are talking about me." So he gets off the donkey, puts the father up on the donkey. They go a little further.
Two people walk by, under their breath, they gossip. Oh, what kind of a dad, He's strong, he's in the prime of his life, doesn't let his son ride. The dad feels bad. Fear builds up about what other people say. The son gets up on the donkey. They're both riding the donkey. Two people walk by. They're from PETA. Have this son and dad ever heard about animal rights? You got a poor donkey carrying fat dad and son. Fear kicks in, father and son. The father and son go, we're going to listen to that fear. They get off the donkey. They're just walking. Two more people walk by. They say, look at these jokers. They got a donkey and nobody rides it. So now they've exhausted all options, you would think, but they end up going into the city carrying the donkey. And they're going across the bridge carrying the donkey, and it's a little heavy, and they trip and fall, and the donkey and the father and son fall off the bridge into the river and lose everything. And so the moral of the story is, you cannot please all the people all the time. And beyond that, and I'm not just talking about people, okay? Because people, everybody knows that. Who here has someone in their family very negative that tears you down? Raise your hand. Herman, raise your hand. Okay. So you have somebody very close to you. Now, who's thinking deeper? Who's thinking more scientifically? Who's being torn down by the whisper of somebody from 20,000 years ago? Everybody should raise their hand. For example, some of you in this room are going, Tai, if I quit my job, I'm not going to do that. My mom will say, what's wrong with me? You got a law degree. What if I am not successful? I'm broke. And you know what the whisper, the fear in the amygdala of your brain is saying? It's your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother from 50,000 years ago going, we have a steady supply of food. If we move from the Serengeti, the plains of Serengeti, and we migrate up to North Africa, we don't know anything. There's no GPS. There's no welfare system. There's no grocery stores. There's a good chance we will die. Now, you don't hear it at that whisper. You just get an urge, a feeling. And so you seize up and you go, I'm not going to do anything out of the box. Or as we said, Sam Walton said, swim upstream. I'm not going to swim upstream because people will say stuff. But the amygdala has gone haywire. It's gone haywire. Because guess what? Who here, if they quit their job, has even a 1% chance, if their new business fails, of starving to death in the United States or a Western world country? Nay, nobody. It's impossible. Nobody starves to death realistically in the modern world. But your brain doesn't know that, because how quickly does your DNA change? Your brain is so close to your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, it's basically identical. So that means you must annihilate the amygdala, and they call this fear annihilation. And it's a real term. It's not pseudoscience. This is something that they're using in the military, people who come back from a war zone and have post-traumatic syndrome. Now, who here feels that fear sometimes dominates their decisions? Be honest. Give you a practical example. Very common question. People go, Tai, should I go to your conference or this other one? Well, that's a fear-based question, because what you're saying is, I don't want to make a bad decision. So ask them, what are you afraid of, man? Are you afraid of spending a couple $100? Is that recoverable? Is there anybody in the history of the world that bought too many books and 20 years later is like, yeah, I'm here homeless? You're like, what happened? You're like, I had a choice between Tony Robbins and Tai Lopez, and I made the wrong choice. I went to see that dumb Tai Lopez guy. I blew $200. Life has been one nonstop downhill slide since then. It's never happened in history. But you know what people don't fear? They don't fear living a crappy life. They don't fear wasting multiple years of their life. I'm talking, how many years have you and I wasted? I guarantee you everything I'm doing now, I could have done at 10 years ago in my 20s. I could be exactly where I am now in my 30s in my 20s. No doubt. I have no delusion that says, well, you can only do this. 15-year-old kid just sold his business for 10 million bucks. 15. Another 15-year-old kid has a $10 million a year toy company in California. Don't tell me I could have done that. They might be smart, but not that much smarter than me. Maybe they're double smart, so I can make a $5 million business when I'm 15 years old. Right? So seeing clearly is the greatest gift you can give yourself. Fearing the things you should fear. You better fear wasting years of your life. I'm telling you, it should haunt you. I'll tell you what shouldn't haunt you. What the person sitting next to you thinks about you, your clothes. Most people are obsessed with music. You know what you shouldn't know? You should not know who Kim Kardashian's married to. What's the point? People always are like, well, Tai, these conferences, this talk, is it a scam? Because that's amygdala, fear. People are very obsessed with not being scammed. And I'm like, okay, where's the protests outside of McDonald's right now? Where's 10,000 people not signing up? We know for a fact, every reputable scientist in the world would be like, if you eat at McDonald's, you're degrading your health. 100% of the time. I don't care what meal you eat, and not just McDonald's. I don't want to pick on them. Where's the protests? Where's the scam? Why is it important for your life to know anything about Kim Kardashian? Why do we even know her name? Really, nobody knows who Sam Walton is. Knowing Sam Walton could change your life.
The tyranny of the 1st and 15th is high on my mind. And if you look at what dominates the vast majority of humans' life right now, it's what? It's finances. It's making money. So this program, 67 Steps, that you're in now is not about business per se. If you go through this 67 steps, you can graduate into, I've got this level 2, which is this, business academy online mini MBA investor entrepreneur system. But I want to touch on things because it's important that you understand that as part of the good life. And, when there's this understanding of the 1st and the 5th being a real tyranny, the average person in the world, billions of people, are just dreading the next day. The next date that their rent is due, their car payment is due, their insurance is due, that they have to pay their insurance and food. Everything that you have is centered around, now it might not be always the 1st and the 15th, but most people are captives to some cycle. That is the definition of scarcity and not having financial independence. See, financial independence means the days begin to blur together. Obviously, you'll have some deadlines and things, but you're not under the tyranny, okay? You're not under the tyranny of the 1st and the 15th. I'm going to try to pull something up here. So for you, how do we get away from this? That's really what I want to talk about. And I think there's a simple way and a hard way. Let's start with the simple way. The simplest way is to change how you understand money, how you understand the tyranny. The way most people understand it is this is an inevitable part of life. That you will be going, can I scrape by for the 1st to pay my rent? Can I scrape by for the 15th? Now, the breakthrough that I had, one of my business partners, John, he said to me, he said, Tai, what is the opposite of monthly bills, monthly expenses? So I thought about it. What is the opposite of monthly bills?
monthly expense. Well, if you just use logic, the opposite of monthly expenses is monthly income. So the solution for everything is income for the most part. Obviously, you need to cut costs, but some costs are inevitable in a world of 7 billion people where you exchange currency for time, for energy, for services. You're not going to get away from that. You know, even Amish or survivalists still have to buy and exchange. Even the Native Americans hundreds of years ago in the United States were exchanging goods with each other, and then with settlers when the settlers came. So when Bone Thugs and Harmony, when people are rapping or singing about, the grind of life and you got to pay those bills and all that kind of stuff, they're right. That's what average person's life is dominated by. That's what the crowd is dominated by, their thoughts. But we want to be like Friedrich Nietzsche when he said that every person wants to rise above the crowd, every extraordinary person. And if you're still in this program, you're on your way. Maybe you already are an extraordinary person that's risen above. So this thought of how do I create income that's not one time? You see, obviously when I said that, monthly expenses, the opposite of monthly expenses is monthly income. That's pretty obvious. People are like, oh, Tai, it's not helpful. How's that help me? Well, let's think a little bit deeper. I think it helps you. I think it helps you to understand you got to just match it. If monthly expenses come in like clockwork, and they do, boy, your bank doesn't care if you lost your job. Your bank doesn't care if your mom's sick. They just want their money. And the same with your car payment, and the same with the grocery store and everything you have. It's like clockwork. You got to pay it. Can't do it on credit most of the time, or eventually your credit will run out. So in the same way, your income has to move into this clockwork. Boom. Always on the first, money coming in. Always on the 15th. Now, how this is known, what I'm saying, because that's why people for the last about 100, even less, 50 years, have had 9-to-5 jobs. That was the solution for it. 150 years ago, most of the world was rural, living on farms. They were not under the tyranny of the 1st and the 15th. I live with the Amish. I live with Joel Salatin, spent 10 years on a farm. If you own your own land, for the most part, you have a pretty sustainable system. You need to make a little bit of money because you got to buy feed and seed and stuff like that. But you're not under that 1st and 15th grind. There is no 1st and 15th if you own the land that you're on. And that's how people traditionally grew up 100 years ago, 150 years ago. It was much less of a rat race. But as the world changed, as it modernized, as it got more competitive, the rise of the corporations, the new ways of making money, people settled, especially the baby boomers after World War II, really settled into this 9-to-5. So this tyranny really came in kind of a underground, behind the scenes kind of way that we didn't even realize. To us, it feels normal, right? You probably grew up with parents that had that 9-to-5, and so that's normal. And like Dr. Helen Fisher says, we have mental mind maps that we basically conform to without realizing. If you grew up with somebody under the tyranny of the 9-to-5 and the 1st and the 15th, you and I will succumb to that most likely unless we work hard against it. This question of how you build scalability is not an easy one, and one of the pieces of advice I've always remembered since I was 19 or 20 years old came from Alan Nation, and Alan Nation said, Tai, it's kind of like raising sheep on a farm. He said the hard part about sheep is that, let's say you have a day job, like you have a regular 9-to-5 job, but your goal is you want to become a sheep farmer. So you get 50 sheep on day one. He said the problem with 50 sheep right away is that you're not really knowing what you're doing. It's going to take you 3 or 4 hours a day. But 50 sheep will not make you an income to replace your main job. That means you got your main job to juggle, but now you have 50 sheep you got to take care of too, and you run out of time in the day, so you end up failing, right? So he said you can't start out with 50 or 100 sheep. It's too much. And you see this a lot with business. People biting off more than they can chew. The average person that comes in with a business idea tells me they're $1 billion idea, or what they think is $1 billion idea. And I'm like, well, why are you starting with $1 billion idea? That's like starting with 300 sheep, and you've never even raised sheep. You never even had a business before. It's one thing to go after $1 billion business if you've done some other ones before. And sure, there's exceptions of people who figure out their first business how to make $1 billion. But if you look at the statistics, we talked about things you can quantify mathematically, the odds are against you if your first attempt is more than, trying to bite off more than you can chew. So you see that with health. People like go, I'm going to lose, 300 pounds. Well, if you're that far overweight, why don't you just try to lose 10 pounds, right? Now, again, the problem, though, is if you only try to lose 10 pounds, sometimes you won't feel the encouragement to make you excited to make you want to lose 20 pounds. That's the same problem that you have when you're raising sheep. If you only have 30 sheep, it's enough work that is distracting and annoying, but it's not enough income so you get to replace your day job, so you get discouraged. So what Alan Nation said is, here's the key, and this is the key point of this lesson, is that what you do is you start out with like 3 sheep, 5 sheep, okay? That seems obvious, but there's one little catch, one little caveat how you want to do that. So with 5 sheep, obviously, it's not gonna take many hours a day. You can still keep your day job and so on, because 5 sheep you can take care of in 5 minutes or something. But here's where the catch comes in. You must raise those 5 sheep, not like most people do. The way most people will treat 5 sheep is they won't put them into an organized kind of method of raising the sheep. They'll name them all. Oh, this is Susie, Betty, Bob, and they treat them like pets. And when you treat them like pets, and you spend 5 minutes with each sheep, and before you feed them, you rub their head and you talk to them and all this. The problem is, if you try to scale to 500 sheep, you can't spend 5 minutes a piece with 500 sheep. So what most people do is when they start out small, they make another error in that they don't treat it as if they're going to grow. So if you knew that you have 5 sheep now, but soon you're going to have 500, you'd start building automated systems to feed the sheep. You'd make sure that instead of maybe calling them names, you'd put little number tags on them. Even though you could remember the name of 5, you're preparing yourself for the moment when you're going to scale, because what Alan Nation said is you have to raise 5 sheep in a way, the same kind of automated, well thought out system that you're going to then jump straight from 5 to 500. So you're going to put in the time, you're going to put in the effort to build the business model of 5 sheep. So you're like, I need a barn, I need this amount of hay, I need sources of hay. I'm not just going to feed them by hand, because sure, that works for 5, but it won't work for 500. So I'm going to build 5 sheep feeders, little hay places to hold the hay. And again, you're doing overkill when it's those 5, because obviously you don't need a hay feeder for 5. You could feed them out of your hand if you wanted, okay? But it's the same thing with where you let them go out on pasture. You wouldn't let them just mow your backyard for you. You'd be like, I want to build a fence. I want to maybe set up different pastures for them that I could rotate. And again, your friends might come over and go, you're crazy. You only got 5 sheep. You're setting all this up. And you say, yeah, because I'm practicing on 5 so that it's manageable, so that I don't burn out, so that I don't fail, and so that I can keep my other income coming in at my other job. Then maybe it'll take you a week, maybe it'll take you a month, maybe it'll take you a year, maybe it'll take you 18 months. But there will be a day when you go, I got it. 5 sheep are only taking me 5 seconds of work a day. 1 second per sheep. I've got it. The water is automated, coming in, on an automatic water float that lets the water in. I've got the pastures all set up, got the hay. It literally takes me, 5 seconds, 60 seconds a day. So now if 5 sheep take me 60 seconds, let's say, that's a minute, then 500 sheep would be 100 minutes a day. That's an hour, 2 hours a day. That's a realistic way to manage 500 sheep. Then you could literally go to 5,000 sheep, right? Hire a couple people. So the path to scalability is, and let me say, when you jump to 500 sheep, that's enough income to quit your job.
Let's step back to the beginning. Belt and suspenders. Where did that come from? Well, when I was on the farm with Joel Salatin, 18 years old, 18 or 19, Joel used to wear, it's common farmers wear a belt, but he used to also wear suspenders. So I asked him, I'm like, why do you do that? He said, well, Tai, belt and suspenders. Sometimes your belt will fail you, right? Sometimes the belt will fail you. And if you know, what do they call it? I forget the name. I'll remember in a second. But basically, things fail or go wrong at the exact worst time, right? Murphy's Law, thank you. You probably thought of that before me. Murphy's Law, right? What can go wrong will go wrong, and it will go wrong at the worst time. So when you're wearing a belt and you really need it to hold up your pants, the moment that it actually fails you, it might do well for, your belt holds up for 6 months. The day it falls is probably the day you need it the most. If you're only wearing suspenders, same thing. The day you need the suspenders will probably be the day that they fall down. So the first thing I want you to write down, if you're writing this down, is no single points of failure. So as we talk about Six Sigma, and Six Sigma is a whole complicated system. We're not going to go all through Six Sigma. It has a whole certification program that you can take months or years to go through. What I want to learn today is a quick shortcut guide, what you need to know around this belt and suspenders, Six Sigma, creating perfection. Joel Salatin said to me the first, month I was there, he said, look, Tai, I have only one rule of working for me. I was like, oh, that sounds simple. What's that one rule? He said, Tai, you're not allowed to make mistakes. And I remember at the moment thinking, that is the most unreasonable request. Who is this guy who telling me the one rule is I can't make mistakes? That's not reasonable. But I'm telling you now, the one rule for you to live the good life, because that's what this is all about: health, wealth, love, and happiness. For you to find all 4 of those things, I have one rule for you: you can't make mistakes. Now, you have 2 choices now. You can do what I did. I made the presumptuous mistake of assuming Joel Salatin was wrong, but he was a smart man. And I should have assumed he was right. That should have been my default position. But I didn't. But I eventually came around, and I'm at the place where if you set the expectation that you won't fail, sure, you might fail every so often, but you'll fail 10 times less than the average person. So the first thing I want you to know is no single points of failure. So Alan Nation, one of my mentors, great saying he always says, he goes, Tai, don't try to teach a pig to fly. You can't do it, and it bothers the pig. All right? And he also told me at another time, he said, Tai, never push on a string. See, you can't push on a string. If you push, it just folds up. You gotta pull on a string. So as you go through life, whether it's managing people, managing your finances, managing your body, or managing your state of mind, fulfillment, happiness, all those intangibles, you're going to bump into people and situations that must change. You probably think of somebody right now. Maybe they work for you. Maybe they live with you, roommate, spouse, whatever it might be. And they must change because they're doing something that's driving you crazy. Or worse, something that's not in your best interest, maybe something malicious or maybe only accidental. But nonetheless, it's ruining your happiness, ruining your financial well-being, your physical well-being. So you have a choice. you could try to teach your way out of it. You can sit them down and you could say, listen, here's what I want you to know about the situation. You can't not do the dishes. I had a friend, he had a roommate who just pile all the dishes. He'd come back 3 days to just the more. In fact, my mom said when she was first married my dad that she had not grown up because my mom grew up with my grandma. My grandpa was a scientist and they lived in Panama for a long time. They weren't from there, but my grandma's German, but they went there to do scientific research, and it was so cheap to have maids that my mom didn't grow up rich, but down, they're American, and compared to Panamanians, they were rich. So my mom grew up always with maids and cooks because you could hire them for whatever, $1 or something a day or whatever the number was. But my mom said the problem was when she got old enough and she got married, she didn't have any skill. So she would just stack up the dishes, and my dad didn't like it. He liked things very clean. So there's an example. My dad was going crazy. My mom couldn't do the dishes, and they didn't have any money, so they couldn't afford a maid then because they were back in America, not Panama. This was in California, in Los Angeles, Long Beach, where I was born. And so my dad sat her down and basically said, you have to learn how to cook. And the cool thing is that my mom was not a pig. Now, in this analogy, what is a pig or what is a string? A pig is somebody who doesn't know and doesn't want to learn. These are the worst people you'll ever find in your life. See, my mom was somebody who didn't know. She was ignorant about cooking and cleaning and housework. But she was willing, when someone sat her down face to face, to go, yeah, that makes sense. I'm not going to be able to function as a normal human without this skill. And she went forward with it. So if you're writing this down, the first thing in your life, you must always be separating. Right? You must always be putting the pigs from just the innocently ignorant into two categories. What we do wrong, what I do wrong, is we lump everybody together. Oh, these are people who don't know stuff. Well, it's not the same. The old dog can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's the pig. The pigs in your life are the people. That some of them, they think they know and they don't know. Some of them know they're ignorant, right? There's different categories of pigs. And both of them, nonetheless, are to be avoided. Because why? You can't teach a pig to fly. They're by definition an unteachable person. Can't do it, and it will bother them, meaning they will turn and bite you. There's a story that Jesus Christ said, which was, don't give your pearls to swine, because they'll eat them and they'll turn around and rend you, which is interpreted as bite you. See, I don't know if Alan Nation got that from the Bible or it's just coincidence, but that is a great analogy in the sense that, if you try to help people who are ignorant, that's like you giving the pearls, the things in your brain, that knowledge that you've acquired, oftentimes through hard and painful experience, and you're trying to pass it on to them. And Jesus Christ and Alan Nation, they both said the same thing. Don't do it, because not only will they squander it, will they not realize the value in what you're giving them, but they will turn around and cause you pain. They will be malicious oftentimes. It's an amazing phenomenon. The more you help people, sometimes the meaner they are. And if you're not careful, you'll adopt this new methodology and this new mindset and philosophy, which is that you shouldn't help people. But no, that comes from this clear misunderstanding of the categorization that you must put people into. It's not judgmental, it's just reality. You have the pigs and you have the innocently ignorant.